Every organism represents a system, by which term we mean a complex of elements in mutual interaction. From this obvious statement the limitations of the analytical and summative conceptions must follow. First, it is impossible to resolve the phenomena of life completely into elementary units, for each individual part and each individual event depends not only on conditions within itself, but also to a greater or lesser extent on the conditions within the whole, or within superordinate units of which it is a part. Hence the behavior of an isolated part is, in general, different from its behavior within the context of the whole. Secondly, the actual whole shows properties that are absent from its isolated parts. As cited in D.C. 1969 Systems Theory, a Discredited Philosophy. In Abacus VP 4. Ludwig von Bertalanffy, an Austrian biologist, is best known as the founder of general system theory (GST), an interdisciplinary framework that views all phenomena from cells and organisms to societies and machines as systems with interacting, interdependent components. He championed an organismic and holistic approach in contrast to the prevailing reductionist and mechanistic models of science. His work established key concepts like open systems, which exchange matter and energy with their environment to maintain a dynamic steady state or flux equilibrium, fundamentally distinguishing living things from the closed systems described by classical thermodynamics. Specifically, the ecological systems engineer Howard T. Odum, honoring Bertalanffy's open systems view and its focus on energy flow, named the storage symbol in his formalized diagrammatic tool, the energy systems language, also known as the universal language of systems, the Bertalanffy module. Ludwig von Bertalanffy was born in Utzgersdorf, near Vienna, Austria-Hungary, on September 19, 1901. As an only child from a distinguished family with ties to Hungarian nobility and Viennese intellectual circles, he was educated at home by private tutors until the age of 10. This early upbringing fostered a strong habit of self-study and a broad intellectual curiosity. Though he began his university studies in 1918 focusing on philosophy and art history at the universities of Innsbruck and Vienna, he eventually concentrated on biology. His interdisciplinary academic foundation culminated in a PhD from the University of Vienna in 1926, with a thesis on the philosopher Gustav Theodor Fechner, a work that foreshadowed his career-defining interest in the themes of wholeness and organization that would lead to his development of general system theory. Ludwig von Bertalanffy's doctoral dissertation, completed in 1926 at the University of Vienna, was titled Fechner und das Problem der Integration höherer Ordnung Fechner and the Problem of Higher Order Integration. This work was rooted in philosophy, specifically examining the psychologist and philosopher Gustav Theodor Fechner, but it was already deeply interdisciplinary, critically laying the groundwork for a generalized concept of organization and challenging the reductionist tendency of science. By focusing on the concept of higher order integration, it essentially launched Bertalanffy's lifelong quest to understand wholeness in complex systems, setting the stage for his most influential contributions in biology and systems thinking. Published in the same year as his foundational biology text, Nikolaus von Kues demonstrates Bertalanffy's deep roots in philosophy and history of ideas, showing his intellectual lineage was not purely scientific. This early philosophical work focused on the Renaissance polymath and theologian Nicholas of Cusa, who explored the concept of the coincidence of opposites, coincidentia oppositorum, and the idea of the universe as a unified, hierarchical whole. By exploring the non-reductionist, holistic thought of Cusa, Bertalanffy effectively signaled his lifelong quest to find philosophical and historical grounding for his system's concept of organization, seeking a non-mechanistic precursor to his biological worldview. Published in 1928, Kritische Theorie der Formbildung, or Modern Theories of Development, was Bertalanffy's first major publication and a foundational text for his organismic view of biology. This work directly confronted the prevailing scientific dualism of the time, rejecting both the reductionist, machine-like view of living things mechanism and the mystical, unknowable forces of life vitalism. Instead, he championed the organismic conception, arguing that the primary characteristic of life is the intrinsic organization of parts into a functional whole or system. The book examined theories of embryonic development and morphology, asserting that the principles of this organization rather than just the component parts must be the main object of biological study, an idea that directly led to his later, formalized general system theory. While the general system theory book mentions his mathematical model for organismic growth, the von Bertalanffy growth function published in 1934 is a highly specific, quantitative contribution that stands on its own. This model is an equation that describes the growth of an organism's length or mass over time. It mathematically formalizes the idea of a dynamic steady state in open systems, where the rate of anabolism building up is proportional to the organism's surface area, and the rate of catabolism breaking down is proportional to its mass. It is still widely used today, particularly in fisheries science and ecology, to model the growth of individual fish and other organisms. Vom Molekül zur Organismenwelt, published in 1940, represents one of Bertalanffy's important early attempts to systematically trace the principles of organization and wholeness across different scales of complexity. This work was a significant effort to bridge the conceptual gap between the non-living molecules and physics and the living cells, organisms, and their environment. It argued that the same organizing principles and system characteristics emerge sequentially as complexity increases, thus reinforcing the need for a unified theoretical biology that could logically connect chemical components to the fully integrated organism. In Problems of Life 1952, Bertalanffy offered a philosophical and scientific popularization of his revolutionary biological concepts, making the case for a new scientific worldview. He provided a deep critique of how classical physics and the second law of thermodynamics, which dictates increasing entropy and decay in closed systems, fundamentally fail to describe living organisms. The central argument hinges on the distinction between closed systems and the open system of life, which maintains its existence and even increases its complexity by continuously exchanging matter and energy with its environment. This book was crucial in shifting biological thought toward the holistic, process-oriented perspective of the organism as an active entity in a dynamic, non-equilibrium state. Biophysik des Facelesslingjutsu is Bertalanffy's rigorous, mathematical development of his concept of the open system and the dynamic steady-state Facelesslingjutsu, which is central to understanding living systems. While Problems of Life 1952 presented the idea philosophically, this volume provided the quantitative models and biophysical derivations. It explicitly dealt with how an open system can maintain a constant, low-entropy state despite continuous throughflow of matter and energy, thus appearing to defy the second law of thermodynamics. This work was critical in establishing a formal, scientific language for theoretical biology, providing the equations like his later growth function necessary for a rigorous, non-mechanistic science of life. One of Bertalanffy's most direct and enduring impacts was his role as a co-founder of the Society for General Systems Research (SGSR) in 1954, now the International Society for the Systems Sciences, IS. He established the society at the Stanford Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences alongside economist Kenneth Boulding, physiologist Ralph Gerard, and mathematician Anatole Rappaport. This initiative gave institutional form and interdisciplinary momentum to GST. The SGSR's goal was to promote the unity of science by facilitating communication across academic fields, arguing that the same general laws of systems applied to physical, biological, and social phenomena. Bertalanffy extended the principles of his general system theory into the social and behavioral sciences with Robots, Men, and Minds 1967. This work is a humanist critique of the prevailing mechanistic model in psychology, particularly behaviorism, which treated humans as passive, machine-like responders to stimuli. He argued that the mind, like the organism, must be seen as an active, organized system, and that human behavior is driven not just by external stimuli but by internal goal-seeking and a spontaneous capacity for symbolization, creation, and value formation. The book thus established a critical bridge, demonstrating how GST could provide a holistic and more meaningful framework for psychology, psychiatry, and the social sciences. His most significant later work, and the culmination of his life's research, is the book General System Theory, Foundations, Development, Applications, published in 1968. This volume collected and formally presented the comprehensive framework of General System Theory (GST), which he had been developing and publishing in articles since the 1940s. A key contribution within this work was his mathematical model for organismic growth published earlier in 1934, now known as the von Bertalanffy function, and his pivotal concept of the open system. By establishing that living organisms are open systems which maintain a dynamic steady state or Facelesslingjutsu by exchanging matter and energy with their environment, Bertalanffy provided a powerful non-reductionist and holistic alternative to the classical mechanistic view of life, ultimately positioning GST as a major interdisciplinary intellectual movement. Published in the same year as his main GST volume, The Organismic Psychology and Systems Theory is a crucial lecture series, the Heinz Werner Lectures, that specifically detailed the application of his systems principles to psychology. This work goes beyond the general critique offered in Robots, Men, and Minds, directly positioning his theory against the then dominant behaviorist paradigm. He detailed how concepts like equifinality, reaching the same final state from different initial conditions, and active personality structure provide a superior framework for studying psychological development and human motivation, effectively launching the foundation for the later organismic and developmental psychology movements. Ludwig von Bertalanffy died on June 12, 1972, at the age of 70, in Buffalo, New York, while serving as a professor at the State University of New York at Buffalo. His passing marked the end of a prolific career dedicated to establishing the holistic, organismic, and open systems approach across biology, psychology, and philosophy. Although he did not live to see his ideas fully permeate the academic mainstream, his legacy as the founder of general system theory continues to profoundly influence systems science and complexity studies worldwide. Following his death in 1972, a final major collection of his essays and scientific philosophical studies was published in 1975 under the title Perspectives on General System Theory. This book was edited by Edgar Tashjian and included a foreword by his wife, Maria von Bertalanffy. It served as a final intellectual testament, gathering his papers on topics like the philosophy of science, his debates with cybernetics, the general characteristics of systems, and the ultimate cultural implications of the systems worldview. This work reinforced the holistic and philosophical scope of his general systemology, the term he often preferred to general system theory. Edited and published posthumously, A Systems View of Man is a collection of Bertalanffy's influential papers and essays that synthesized his decades of thought on the philosophical and humanitarian implications of the systems approach. This compilation focused specifically on the human being in a systems context, covering topics like the psychology of the self, values, symbolism, and the place of man in the cosmos. It served to consolidate his humanist agenda, arguing that the systems perspective restores the concept of the whole person and provides an essential counter-philosophy to the dehumanizing effects of a purely mechanistic, technological society. Modern science is characterized by its ever-increasing specialization, necessitated by the enormous amount of data, the complexity of techniques and of theoretical structures within every field. Thus science is split into innumerable disciplines continually generating new subdisciplines. In consequence, the physicist, the biologist, the psychologist, and the social scientist are, so to speak, encapsulated in their private universes, and it is difficult to get word from one cocoon to the other. p. 29.